Hello and welcome to Knit in the City. I am Rebecca, the city is Malmö, and we actually have sun today, which rarely happens in December, so enjoy. It may look a bit weird because it just shines on some parts of my face, but bear with me, this is very enjoyable, at least for me. And today I will be talking about some of my favorite knitting books from my knitting library that I have built over the years. And these are pattern books, so I will also show you the patterns from all of these books. I will, however, apologize in advance for these B-roll that I have taken of me flipping through the books. Because I am flipping with one hand and filming with the other, so it may look a bit awkward at times. Also, the light is not great, because we don't get a lot of light this time of year, but hopefully you can still see all of the patterns. And I try to take it slow. Some of the books I only have in digital format, so then I will just put the pictures in the frame while I'm talking about the books. And I will also be talking while I am flipping in the background, but sometimes the B-roll is longer than what I have to say about the books, so then it will be quiet for a while when you get to watch all of the patterns. I have also been careful not to show you any of the instructions, and that also made it a little bit harder. But hopefully it will be okay. Yeah, I will get into it right away. I will also talk about the books in the order that I purchased them. And the first book is Stitch and Bitch by Debbie Stoller, and this is an older book. It came out in 2003. And I think I purchased it about 3 years later. And this was my gateway into the knitting world. Because before this, I hadn't been knitting since I was a child, when my mom taught me. And I made like a pair of mittens or something like that. At first I picked it up from the library. And I don't really know why I chose to delve into knitting at this point in my life. But I guess I was bored and I needed a hobby. And somehow this is where I went. I never look at this book anymore, but it is the book that taught me the art of knitting, so it is very dear to me. Half of the book is knitting instructions for beginners. They are very thorough, and the author has a nice writing style that is quite humorous. At least I found it funny back then. And she takes you through the whole knitting process, from casting on, through knits and purls, different increases and decreases, to binding off and blocking your finished piece. The other half of the book is patterns that are appropriate for beginners. And this part has, in my humble opinion, not aged very well, but I guess there are a few that could still be made. Or I don't know, I mean, this kind of fashion is back now, so maybe this is like the height of style. I have made a few of these patterns, but I don't have the items anymore, so I have nothing to show you from this book. book is a real classic. It is Knitting Without Tears by Elizabeth Zimmerman. And this book is a real gem of wit and knowledge. Elizabeth Zimmerman was a bona fide knitting guru, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with her already. In this book, she explains knitting in a fun and easy way. She has a very laid-back attitude towards knitting that I really like. A kind of do whatever you want as long as it gets you there approach. She explains the knitting process and teaches you everything you need to know to knit a sweater or other smaller garments. She also discusses different yarn bases and knitting gear. This book also has patterns, but they are more recipes than actual patterns. She only gives you one set of numbers and then tells you how to make calculations for different sizes. This is an old book. It was first printed in 1971, but the patterns are quite classic and timeless. A word of warning though, the pictures are in black and white and not very pretty. But this book is worth having just for the entertainment value. It also has a lot of useful information and general wisdom. I actually haven't knit anything from this book, but it was a joy just reading through it. And the next book is Knits About Winter by Emily Foden. And this is a really beautiful book. It is set in a rural, that's a difficult word to say, Canadian winter landscape. And this is what everything from the photographs to the patterns and the yarns are centered around. The designer, who is also a yarn dyer of Viola yarns, tells the story of moving to the Canadian countryside after living in Toronto and Devon, England. In the intro to the book, she describes how the harsh but beautiful landscape is the inspiration for her designs and the color of the yarns that she dyes. She also lets the reader into the story of how she moved to an old general store and the history of this building and the people who built the village where she now lives. These designs are inspired by the cold winter, both in colors and in practicality. And Emily describes how she wanted to make garments that would be practical for the people who used to live there, even though the designs are not historically accurate. The book contains 13 patterns, from jackets to sweaters and shawls, to smaller garments like socks, mittens, and a vest. All of the designs are made using Viola yarns, yarns that has been dyed with the colors that can be seen in the wintry landscape. I have only knit the sock patterns from the book, but I have knit lots of them. The snowshoe sock is a thicker sock where you hold 2 strands of fingering weight sock yarn together. I love this pattern so much that I have knit 6 pairs. I use up my leftover sock yarn and hold 2 different colors together and then change to a different color when I run out of yarn. And this is also how the pattern is made. I've also made 3 or 4 pairs of the favorite sock, also using leftover sock yarn. And this is a fingering weight sock. And both patterns come in several variations. And I have 2 pairs of the thinner sock that I have here. And if I have pictures of the others, I will put them on the screen. But this is the favorite sock from the book. And I have also made it in these colors. And this is just like whatever leftover yarn that I had that I have put together. And these are really fun to knit. And the next book is 52 Weeks of Sock by Laine Publishing. And this is a collection of designs from lots of different designers. And this is quite recent. It came out in 2020. And this is a very pretty book. And it's all about the patterns. There is no reading apart from a foreword. The book contains 52 pairs of socks from different designers. The photography is stunning, and the patterns include many different knitting techniques, such as cables, lace, stranded colorwork, intarsia, and more. This book is probably best suited for intermediate and advanced knitters. I have knit and is in the process of knitting a few of the socks in this book, and I will put pictures of these. I highly recommend this if you like knitting socks and have made a few pairs before. comes from a Danish designer called Laerke, and it's called a close knit in English. I have it in Swedish. And this is a really cool book from a really cool designer. She does whatever the heck she wants to. And her most famous sweater pattern, the Alone Together sweater, she published it on Instagram during COVID. And this is a crazy colorful thing where you tie knots between the different colors instead of weaving in ends. We like that, of course. This method of tying knots is described in the book. And the whole book is characterized by this punk attitude. And that is also the vibe you get from the patterns. In the book, you get the story of how Laerke came into knitting and became a knitting designer. And it feels very personal in a good way. The book contains 15 patterns, and many of them can be made with all of Laerke's different unique techniques. And from this book, I have made the No Limit sweater in the bad idea technique, and I have also made a scrap scrunchie. The book contains a lot of fun, colorful photographs. And Bagger has also come out with a second book in the same vein, but I haven't had a chance to take a look at that yet, so I can't say anything about what it looks like. But it seems to be quite similar, but with different patterns, of course. And like I said, my copy of this book is in Swedish, but it also comes in English and, of course, Danish. Maybe other languages too, but this is what I know. Is Ready Set Socks by Rachel Coopy, and it's from Pom Pom Publishing. And this is a book from one of my favorite sock designers, and I think it's a genius book. It features 10 different sock patterns knit up in colorful yarns and yarn combinations, and all of the patterns are knit in 2 different yarn weights, 1 fingering and 1 DK. The socks are knit top down, but for all the patterns you can choose whether you want a short row heel, a heel flap and gusset, or an afterthought heel. So these are quite customizable. The patterns start with a simple vanilla sock and advances through slightly more challenging techniques, from simple knit and purl patterns to mosaic knitting, cables and lace, but none of them are very difficult. The book has a technique section where the author explains the different parts of the sock and gives you tips on variations and adjustments. Here you can also find information on how to read charts, cast on, knit in the round, different decreases, and how to graft your toe once you're done knitting. And from this book I have knit Glover and Osato, and I do have pictures of them that I will show you. Those two are in fingering weight, and I have also knit Guillem in a DK weight. Unfortunately, I can't find this sock, and I don't think I have a picture of it, but they're like in a lime green, really spring kind of color. And these patterns are really straightforward and easy to follow. The next one is Fabel Knitwear by Helene Arnesen. And this book contains 34 patterns, so you get a lot of bang for your buck. And it's mostly sweaters, and the style is described as romantic. The pieces have a vintage feel to them, something that the writer talks about in the beginning of the book, where she presents the different historical fashions that she has drawn inspiration from, or like the time periods. The book is centered around the beautiful feminine patterns and only contains a few notes on fit, gauge, modifications, and yarn substitutions. You get a lot of gorgeous patterns with this book, and many of these patterns have negative ease, which is rare in today's fashion, where most things are oversized. So I really like this. In my opinion, after trying some of the patterns, the sizes are quite small, so you need to think about that when you pick your size. I have knit the Italian vest in the recommended size for me, but I had to give it to my daughter because it came out way too small. This book I would recommend for a more seasoned knitter, even though it has a few simpler patterns like the vest I talked about and the sugar plum sweater. the last book I'm going to talk about today is a new book. It came out in October, I think. And this is Sari Nordlund's Softly Timeless Knits. And this is one of my favorite designers because of her beautiful and always timeless, like the book says, designs. And she's great at making pretty cables and lace and incorporating this in her designs. This book contains 22 patterns, mainly sweaters, but also a couple of cardigans and a few smaller projects, such as socks and hats. And the book is all about the patterns and only has a few other pages, such as a preface, special techniques, fit, gauge swatching, and how to read charts. This is also a beautiful book with exquisite photography. The pictures were taken in Paris, and all of the patterns are named after Greek muses. I have not yet had the chance to knit anything from this book, since it's so new, but I have already decided on a few must-haves. And I think I will start by knitting the Melete hat.